Hi everybody and welcome back. I hope everybody has had an uneventful new year so far. At least if it was eventful, it was all good things that were happening. Today I want to talk to you again about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to be looking at some tweets regarding this whole we got to get rid of the word race debacle, because using the word race is inherently evil. How dare it's racist when you use the word race, even though we're talking about different creatures, alien creatures that do not exist on Earth, that have different abilities because they have different physical makeups. We're going to look at a video by Clownfish TV. If you don't know who Clownfish TV is, they talk all things pop culture, especially like comic books and video games, things like that. They have 284,000 subscribers, so they definitely do not need me to promote them in any way, but I'm going to promote them anyway. Before we get into this video, I do want to thank everybody for stopping by, and please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure that you're still subscribed. Watch the video to the very end. That does seem to help the algorithm quite a bit. If you leave a comment down below, we have to keep it respectful for YouTube's rules, unfortunately. You can find me on Rumble and on Twitter. Let's get into this video here.
Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I am not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video, but we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and the fallout, I guess, from Wizards of the Coast announcing that they're going to remove the term race from their tabletop game. Yes, they're no longer going to use race in Dungeons & Dragons because it's problematic, because monsters are people too. So we're going to look at some reactions on Wizards D&D official Twitter account. And I have to give a hat tip to Black Sage D, who sent this over to me. I missed it, and I'll tell you why, because this was actually a response to another tweet. They buried it. They buried that they were going to get rid of the term race. And we're gonna see what people are saying about it. It's kind of funny. Players are rejecting this change. I have a feeling that people are going to use the term race at their own tables anyway, because look, again, we are talking about fantasy monsters, fictitious monsters, not people. None of these monsters are stand-ins for any kind of people, despite what the Mary Sue says. And we're going to talk about their ridiculous defense of this, because of course they are defending it, because they always strike a contrary position from the majority of fandom, don't they? That's kind of their brand. The Mary Sue is contrary. That should be their tagline. So we're going to talk about that and the numerous apologies that led up to this.
All right, so I do want to point something out that you might not know if you don't play, or if you haven't played the older versions of Dungeons & Dragons. In the original Dungeons & Dragons game, your race was who you were. At least if you were not human. If you were an elf, that's what you were. You were an elf. That's it. You were an elf. You didn't have a profession. Your profession was elf. Same thing if you're a halfling, you were a halfling. If you were a dwarf, you were a dwarf. And the only other race available to you was human. And if you were a human, you could be a fighter, a magic user, or a cleric. Why they went with the term cleric is beyond me. Those of you in the United States are probably like, what's a cleric? A cleric is a Muslim religious leader. So there you go. So it's a really weird way of kind of doing things, but that's how they did it. And we have evolved quite a long way since then. Let's get back to the video.
Found this today, ironically enough, that the Associated Press said Oxford Dictionary said that goblin mode has been selected by Online Vote as its word of the year. Well, one, it's two words, right? It's a phrase. It defines the term as behavior which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly, or greedy. Metaverse and I Stand With finished as runners-up. That's great. Except last year, they were trying to cancel J.K. Rowling for her portrayal of goblins. They said that the goblins were a stand-in for Jewish people, even though they clearly were not. So somebody needs to tell Oxford, one, that's two words, Oxford Dictionary, and two, there was a big controversy around having those personality traits intertwined with goblins because it offended real-world people. Let
me take a look at this here, just a little bit more detail. A trending Jon Stewart podcast clip reminds us that as long as fantasies remain structured around anti-Semitism, Jewish people will be... What the hell? Since when is medieval fantasy structured around anti-Semitism? What is this crap? I might have to do a whole video on this. This is garbage, because I have never, ever once played in a game, ever, in the decades that I've gamed, never once played in a game where anybody was like, I'm against Jews. We're gonna play a game about killing the Jews, or we're gonna play a game about being anti-Jewish. Never. And I've never, ever even played a game that was against any of the earthly humans. Racism as we see it today in modern society on Earth. Never. I've played plenty of games where the different races were racist against other races in the game, because those are actually different races of creatures. I mean, there's only one human race, right? We use the word race loosely to refer to like black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Arabic, but there's only one human race, technically. And fantasy role-playing games, there's usually multiple actual intelligent races. You can see this throughout the history of fantasy writing. You look at it in, of course, Tolkien. In Conan the Barbarian comics, there are other races that are intelligent. They're not the stars of the show. They're usually the bad guys, but whatever. That's there. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons has this all over the place. It's a big deal because this is actually gives you the ability to like explore a different world more thoroughly. That's really what it's about. Like, races in sci-fi and medieval fantasy just make it so much more interesting. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
12 real-world people were offended on Twitter by J.K. Rowling's Goblins 20 years after the movies came out, by the way. You know, they're just looking for a reason to cancel J.K. But yeah, that brings me back to this. You know, this whole thing about Wizards of the Coast constantly apologizing for race, constantly apologizing for offending Twitter, offending Tumblr, offending their 5e fan base. And, you know, eventually it's going to come to a head. I think it's not sustainable financially. And we're already seeing that Wizards of the Coast is in trouble because of Magic the Gathering. They've produced too many cards. There's too much subpar material out there, and they were trying to make bank off the pandemic, right? So what's interesting is if you got to this Mary Sue article, they talk about how problematic it is. They said the new playtest material includes an update to the Ardling, Dragonborn, Goliath species and reads in part, the peoples of the D&D multiverse hail from many worlds and are peoples of many different sapient forms of life. A player's character's species is the set of game traits that an adventurer gains from being one of those life forms. God, this is like birthing persons, right? A character's upbringing and training are represented in the rules by class and background. Some species can trace their origin to a single word, plane of existence, or God, while other species appear in multiple realms at once. Whatever a species' origin story is, its members have spread across a multiverse and contribute to various cultures. The culture of Dragonborn. So they're like, look, and the Mary Sue joined in on the dogpiling, right? It seems unlikely that removing the term race from the source material will completely resolve the issue of fantasy racism in Dungeons & Dragons. There was no issue. There was no issue of fantasy racism in Dungeons & Dragons. There is no history of racism in Dungeons & Dragons other than what the media has put there.
I like how they're calling this an issue of fantasy racism in Dungeons & Dragons. You know what? Those damn elves, I just want to get them. Urgh. It's like, elves aren't real. I could be racist against them all I want to be. It doesn't matter because they're not real. I am 100% against the flying spaghetti monster. Okay, they flying spaghetti monsters don't real. They just don't real. Sorry.
In the last 5 to 6 years, they keep having this quote-unquote conversation because we have a lot of new players coming in. And these new players, a lot of them are coming from like Tumblr and Twitter, and they're bringing their baggage with them, and they're bringing it to the game, and they're making the game say things it didn't say. Orcs are not black people, okay? The Hadozi, the flying monkey slave race, not black people, if that's what you're thinking, just like goblins aren't Jewish people, but if you're ascribing those personality traits to a group of individuals, I mean, come on. Despite making these necessary and welcome updates, WotC took several steps backward earlier this year when it released an updated version of Spelljammer, including a species known as the Hadozi, which I think came from Star Frontiers, actually, being depicted with minstrel imagery. No, they look like a bard. In addition to having a background story tied to slavery and forced eugenics. Following significant backlash on social media, I don't think it was significant. I think it was, again, a handful of people in their alt accounts on Twitter. Wizards updated its digital Spelljammer content on D&D Beyond to remove these elements. Now we're getting rid of the term race, and then after that, we're going to find something else to be offended about. We're absolutely going to find something else to be offended about. So let's look at some of the comments here on Twitter. Whether you prefer the term race, species, folk, people, ancestry, heritage, or something else to differentiate orcs from elves, one thing is guaranteed. Someone who spends too much time online can tell you you're a horrible person for that preference, so what's your preference? Oh, thank God. I was worried you might have been focusing on something important. Glad to see that's not the case.
Sorry, these make me laugh. It's like this guy calls out people just whinging about something that doesn't matter at all. You can play the game however you want to. And the other guy pointing out is like, okay, so you changed the word from race. That's not going to change anything. It's just the word. You can call it whatever you want to. You can call it species. You can call it genetic determinism or anything you want to. It's still just people can be prejudiced any way they want to be.
I remember that back in the 80s and 90s, a common complaint was that race was the wrong term to use. Now that D&D finally does what's been asked to for 40 plus years, I'm sure someone will complain that's too woke. I don't know about too woke, unnecessary, completely unnecessary, and...
No, Neon, it is too woke. This is giving into the woke mob that claims there's racism hiding around every corner. Everywhere you go, it's anti this race, it's anti that race, it's anti-Semitism in this case. You know, the only significant racism I see in this country is against white people, because it's systematic systems and systemicism and all that system stuff that they're talking about. Because it's like there are hiring quotas for other races, but nope, not for white people. There are loans that go to people because of their race, because they're not white, you know. So it's there are things in our society that are working against white people, yet somehow white people keep coming on top, probably because there's just more white people than there are of any other race in the country.
Indicative of modern wizards constantly trying to appease a mob of people that are looking to constantly be outraged by some minutia. Yes, by all means, let us pretend that referring to each other's characters as being different species is really somehow less divisive than saying race. Was anyone ever really triggered by hearing that dwarves and elves are different races? No. I think what happened was when we started bringing more monster races into the mix, more playable monster races. And that was like, well, you know, these are historically evil monsters, but I want to be a good person playing this monster. So you can't say that my people, my fictitious people, are bad people. Here, this person, our Arcanus Press says, changing the word from race to species does nothing to address the issue. This seems wrong. Different species cannot interbreed, and peoples in D&D can, at least in some cases. Is peoples less divisive, or is there still some racist overtones? What's your peeps? Now they're going over species and ancestry. What's the point? You guys can't go out of business fast enough. No reason to change the logical term for make-believe storybook creatures that are actually different races, unlike the real world where there's only a human race. As always, you do your table, I'll do our table. Pretty pathetic. Anyone getting emotional about either way. So the final nail in the coffin of half X people because, well, basic biology, a difference between species and race, but you remove them already from the new options. I don't know about that. The problem I see with your choice of alternative is the scientific definition. In nature, members of different species cannot produce offspring. Half elves, half orcs, etc. would cease to exist. It could confuse some people. The whole damn thing is confusing and unnecessary. It's not a complaint about species. Race has connotations of acknowledging that these are groups of intelligent people. Species has connotations of treating them as animals. This is literally a step backwards and has worse implications when analyzed to a real-world perspective. Good on you for removing race, but I'm not sure species is a lot better. I really hope you change the barbarian to berserker. Makes more sense. I don't know. I think reading several different people have said...
That's an interesting thing. This Armitage is hacking the Gibson. It says, I really hope you change the class barbarian to berserker. I wish they would just get rid of classes altogether, because classes are ridiculous in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm not joking. You cannot do anything outside of your class. You can take more than one class, but you can't get an ability that's outside of your class restrictions. It's like, why? Why can't I do that? Why can't I learn one single magical spell because I'm hanging out with this wizard over here and he taught me how to use magic just for this one spell? Nope, can't do that. You got to take the entire class wizard. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, historically the word barbarian meant a non-Roman, so it would make more sense to have the term berserker for the barbarian class. But I say just get rid of all of it. No classes. You don't have these problems.
Ancestry might fit better. I think it's all dumb. We're talking about fictitious monsters. Defined word should not be used. No, defined word should not be used. You need to ask Oxford for the definition of single words, as it adds goblin mode to its lexicon, right? So let's see what some of the quote tweets are. Not reading all this, my dwarf warrior is still allowed to call elves knife eaters or no. Society, when D&D bins itself in its entirety, once it realizes the game is fascist. Oh my God. You have to be in a society absolutely saturated with racism to come up with fantasy races. There's no path to wokeify it.
Okay, so that was like really bad. Let's see here. You have to be in a society absolutely saturated with racism to come up with fantasy races. Yeah, that's how it happened. So Tolkien, because these races are based on Tolkien's writings, he was just in a society saturated with racism. Really? You mean to tell me that like none of these things existed before? I mean, I've read books on the subject matter of medieval fantasy, where it comes from. People were believing in this stuff for thousands of years before we kind of realized that, hey, you know what? Sprites aren't real. They're not real things. You know, people used to believe in giants, cyclopses, harpies, all sorts of crazy monsters. And this was back before the medieval times.
There's no path to wokeify it. I guess shout out, trying to do better, but also LOL, they picked the one term that sounds even more like phrenologists discussing orcs and goblins. Just steal PF2E's shit at this point. Let me get dwarven abilities and cultural shit because my elf was adopted. I have to say that for a game that's about players creating worlds and environments that they want and not specifically adhering to rules as written, this is a pointless change. It is pointless. Now you'll have the same idiots you want to please attacking you by claiming the use of species won't solve the imaginary problem. You bunch of C words. Your brand is dead. Here, yeah, exactly. Right underneath that. I feel like going from race to species is a half-foot step sideways. The problem wasn't the specific word race. It was the biological essentialism that doesn't go away when you use species. The problem is with these fictitious monsters or races, they do have biological advantages. They are not human. They're not human. We're not talking about different skin tones or different ethnicities of human beings. We're talking about creatures that are entirely different. They might be humanoid, but they are very different from humans. And that is the fundamental problem. Yes, there's going to be biological essentialism, just like dogs and cats have different biologies. And you can't mix the two of them together. That'd be interesting. That'd be kind of cute. But you can't, well, unless it's cat dog.
Puppy cat. Isn't there something called puppy cat? All those of you out there who are younger probably know about that thing. I don't. Way past my time.
Oh, and that's horrifying. But they have different traits. They have different abilities and different preferences and different strengths and weaknesses based on their biology because they're not human races. And at the end of the day, it's all freaking fantasy. It's all make-believe. And I think a lot of players at this point are just going to use their own house rules and just do what they're going to do, or they're just going to forget all about 5e and 1D&D and go back to playing OSR, go back to playing, first edition, second edition, Pathfinder, other alternatives. There are so many alternatives to D&D these days. You do not have to play Wizards D&D if you don't want to. So I'm going to wrap this up.
All right, so I want to move on to another video that Clownfish TV did regarding 1D&D and what that is and how if you play Dungeons & Dragons and you want to continue playing Dungeons & Dragons moving into the future, you're going to have to pay money. More so than just buying a couple of books and playing the game with the books that they released. Now, D&D used to have a different model. I played a lot of 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. The 2nd edition released more books than any other version of Dungeons & Dragons. I heard that 4th edition released a ton as well. I don't know. I've never even seen a 4th edition book that I'm aware of. But 2nd edition, their model was, hey, release as many books as possible. That way we get as many sales as possible. That way we can continue to employ everybody. Also, D&D was in some ways more popular then than it is now. Role-playing in general was in some ways more popular than it is now. But let's get into this other video.
Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon, not here with Geeky Sparkles, so we're going to talk about something she really doesn't care too much about. Tabletop gaming, Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast looking for more money. And they're looking for more money. Apparently they're going to be trying to monetize Dungeons & Dragons like they monetize video games. That there's going to be more microtransactions, there are going to be more in-app purchases, that they want to bleed players dry because, the burden to pay for all the books and stuff historically has been on dungeon masters, on game masters. No, everybody's got to pay. You got to.
So that has never been my experience. Typically, I find that the players and the GMs or DMs, in the case of Dungeons & Dragons, buy a bunch of the books. They want to have the books so that way they can just look up stuff at home when they're not playing. You don't have to go to the game master's house and go, hey, can I borrow that book? No, you can just buy the book, have it yourself, and then look at stuff and go, next time we play, I want to play this character. If my character dies, I want to play this character, and so on and so forth. So I don't know where this idea is coming from because this is not really the case from what I have seen, is people buy the books that they're gaming, that they're playing with.
Pay to play. So we're going to talk about this. This is not shocking at all for a number of reasons. The first being that Wizards of the Coast is dragging Hasbro down. Yeah, their last earnings report was not good. There was a lot of blame being placed on Wizards of the Coast, dragging Hasbro's stock down because of the allegations that they've been overproducing Magic cards. Also, players not terribly happy with 1D&D. That's a whole nother thing we can talk about. But also, this should have been the biggest red flag. Most of the people in charge at Wizards of the Coast, they've been hired from video game companies, from Microsoft specifically. So Hasbro obviously has been looking for Wizards to be more gamified, more like an app developer.
Actually, the biggest red flag is that Wizards of the Coast CEO is a female, and she was probably hired to fill some sort of pointless quota, not because she is a good CEO.
There were rumors a couple of years ago that they were possibly going to prep Wizards for sale to a company like Tencent. They brought in these people from Microsoft to run it. Now they're looking at microtransactions. And Kotaku, shockingly enough, Kotaku is telling people to just go play Pathfinder instead. They're like, maybe it's time to quit D&D. Unbelievable. This is after they've dogpiled Wizards of the Coast for racism, racist lore, removing the term race from the game. Again, Kotaku and the people who follow Kotaku have been the loudest voices calling for changes to Dungeons & Dragons. And now they're like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, just ditch the game because in-app purchases. We don't want that. We don't want microtransactions. So we're going to talk about this. So we do talk about tabletop gaming, not as much as we used to. I am an old head. I played the basic set. I played AD&D Second Edition and had a lot of good times back in the day. Tried to get my kids back into RPGs, into tabletop, and I found out that the scene is hella weird right now. It's really weird. It's weirdly politicized. A lot of Tumblr politics involved in Dungeons and Dragons, and Wizards of the Coast continually bends the knee time and time and time again. Whether it's character skin tones or the concept of race, or they're accused of flying monkeys being stand-ins for black people, orcs being stand-ins for black people. Do you see a common theme going on here? Yeah, that's not good. If you think non-human monsters are minorities, then I think the problem is with you. But Wizards, every time somebody gets a hair up their butt about something on Twitter or on Tumblr, Wizards makes a big statement about how they're going to change it all and they're good people, yada yada. Well, they're so good that they're willing to take a lot more of players' money through microtransactions. So this is coming from Kotaku. Again, Kotaku, who at the end of the article tells you to quit D&D and play Pathfinder instead. D&D CEO thinks the hobby is under-monetized compared to video games. In the investor meeting, Wizards of the Coast CEO expresses a desire for the type of recurrent spending you see in digital games. Again, they brought people in from Microsoft, from gaming, to work at Wizards of the Coast, and they've actually been ramping up their video game division over there at Wizards. I think they're doing like a G.I. Joe game or something. Like they're trying to turn Wizards into Blizzard. D&D is so synonymous with the hobby that I, like many who play tabletop RPGs other than D&D, often just refer to such games as D&D for short. But apparently that kind of name recognition and dominance in the field isn't enough for publisher Wizards of the Coast. Based on comments made during an investor call with the CEOs of Wizards and its owner Hasbro, the companies are interested in finding ways to increase monetization strategies similar to the kind we all know and love in video games, microtransactions and subscriptions.
Completely unnecessary. When I was a young man, I had Dungeons & Dragons action figures. I had Dungeons & Dragons minifigures that were toys that were static as well, besides the action figures. Not to mention the Dungeons & Dragons and miniature figures that you use to play the game with. Not to mention posters, comic books, novels, informational books outside of the game, just like game world books that are like, oh, look, we're going to talk about various things about this game setting that you guys like so much. There were tons of game books about game settings, and that's what they need to go back to. There was the animated series. There are movies from, what is that? Yeah, about 20 years ago, they made some movies that I don't know how popular. They did make it to theaters. I don't know how popular they were. I never saw any of them, strangely. But D&D is, like I've said many times, not my favorite game by far. I played it a lot, but it's such a pain in the ass dealing with the game mechanics. Anyway, let's get back to the video here.
There it is, guys. Got to milk the players too. It's not enough to milk the DM. See, I was always the DM. I always was the one that had to pay for all the books. And that did kind of suck after a while. It sucked. It was like I'm the guy that has to, every time, hey, we need some new monsters. We need some new modules. Guess who had to spend his allowance buying the modules? It was me. As reported by Dicebreaker, Hasbro CEO Chris Cox and Wizards of the Coast CEO Cynthia Williams are looking to grow the future of Dungeons & Dragons through the type of recurrent spending you see in digital games, highlighting the fact that DMs or game masters spend the most on the hobby through rulebooks and digital services. Williams bemoaned the fact that players, those who only play individual characters, just aren't spending enough to play in the company's fantasy world. She described D&D's current state as under-monetized. Yes, because they're getting it from all sides now. Hasbro's probably telling them, you got to pick up the pace. We got investors to please. There have been numerous negative articles about Magic the Gathering kind of withering on the vine in the last year or two, because it was huge during the pandemic, but then they were supposedly overprinting cards. Now, I don't know the specifics of that. I actually know a guy who runs a game shop, and I was asking him about it, and he said, yeah, it's terrible. He said it's...
So I don't know anything about investing, really, to speak of. I imagine that people are not investing in Dungeons & Dragons, but investing in Hasbro. So why doesn't Hasbro subsidize Dungeons & Dragons and stop complaining? I mean, Hasbro's this big international toy company. They can't just start pumping out something that somebody's going to really want to buy a lot of and then go, okay, well, we use this to recoup their losses. Maybe they're woke. That's why it's not working. Or maybe they go to a print-on-demand model for Dungeons & Dragons books. That's the easy way to save money right there. You just go, okay, well, if you want to get Dungeons & Dragons books, they're not available in any hobby shops. They're not available in any bookstores. If you want a Dungeons & Dragons book, print on demand. Of course, I think interest in Dungeons & Dragons in general then would fall off. Doesn't bother me any. Go play a good game.
It's completely killed the secondary market. But he's like, it is what it is. They get paid. He doesn't get paid. It's true that purchasing the core rulebooks costs around $100 and can provide you with a lifetime of material to play with if you wanted to save money and use your imagination, like some kind of monster. $100 isn't nothing, but it's hardly the amount that, say, a lifelong gamer is likely to spend on new video games in 1 year, and many players of video games do spend much more than that just on microtransactions within their favorite titles. However, some might say this ability to spend around $60 to $100 and then let your imagination guide you the rest of the way is the appeal of the hobby. I would say it is. It's approachable, affordable, and has a personal, unplugged feel to it, but then again, that doesn't match up with the kinds of spending models we see in digital games. And again, Wizards brought people in from Microsoft, from video games, to do just this. They want to turn it into a digital product. From a certain angle, perhaps it's easy to understand why executives at WotC and Hasbro may lament that someone can just buy a few books, get some dice, and spend the rest of their lives happily playing the game without spending another cent. There are plenty of great supplemental source books available too, though which for $30 to $60 offer new options for character creation, new magic items and abilities, etc. There's also a digital service known as D&D Beyond, which offers online access to various rules, reference materials, etc. In that sense, digital game-style spending models are already there, and D&D has hit a new level of pop culture awareness because of Stranger Things and Critical Role. We know that. Sometimes it's not even about the game as much as it is hanging out with fun, entertaining people. Wizards, it seems, wants people to pay more for the experience more often. These comments come as D&D is currently undergoing a transition from its wildly popular 5th edition rule set published 8 years ago to the next revision with the so-called 1D&D, the politically correct 1D&D, now without race. This new frontier promises a brand new digital play space and tighter integration with D&D Beyond's suite of online tools. What we've seen of the new digital tools sure looks like a video game, and it's depressing to think that central to the development of the next gen of the hobby, C-suite dreams of pay-to-play extravaganza are on the way, and when you look at D&D Beyond, it feels like financial infrastructure is already in place. It is. Here it is. The next big D&D experience looks like a video game, and that is a problem. Yeah, I remember I used to play, this is how old I am, I used to play the SSI AD&D games. Remember those? Those were pretty cool. Pool of Radiance and Silver Blades and Death Knights of Krynn, that was pretty good. But yeah, that's exactly what is going on here. They're going to turn D&D into a large mobile app with microtransactions. And, at this point, you can nope out. You can choose to nope out. You can find...
Yeah, that looks like a video game, and I don't see how you could actually incorporate interactive storytelling into a video game and keep it a role-playing game, honestly. I don't really... Because I'm sure out there, if you play games, you know about role-playing games, video game role-playing games. But to really have the imaginative feel, that's the broad appeal of role-playing games, is because you imagine the world the way that it's described to you. You don't have a computer telling you exactly what the world looks like. And I think that's where the two differ, and they each have a different appeal. I like video games. I like role-playing games. But the thing is yeah, you can't get that imaginative feel in a video game that you have in a role-playing game.
Another system, which is interesting because, again, Kotaku, which has been publishing tons and tons of articles about how problematic D&D is. Lots and lots of articles, if you go through, especially Kotaku, Polygon. These two outlets especially have really hit D&D pretty hard, and I believe pushed Wizards to bend the knee in terms of modifying how they handle race and identity politics and all that crap, right? But now they're telling you to go play Pathfinder. The next time you start working on some homebrew rules and stories, won't you please think of the poor CEOs who lose sleep over the fact that you're not paying enough to do so? And don't you dare consider playing another game like Pathfinder or 13th Age.
Okay, so let's talk about the CEO of Hasbro. Brian Goldner's net worth $17 million. He is the CEO of Hasbro. And if this is way off, let's say the $17 million is super high, well, maybe he only has $7 million then, right? I mean, being way off, that's less than 50% of what this says, $7 million. You could live the rest of your life in the United States on $7 million, the way things are, the way things are going. So I think he's fine. In my last video, I did make the comment, do you think that the 1% got their money from a job? This used to not be the case, that CEOs made these millions and millions of dollars. Now, yes, you can become part of the 1% by getting a job as a CEO of a major company like this. But that's the only job I know of, actual, just, hey, I'm working for somebody else. This is my job, instead of I own my own company, or, I'm the only employee at my own company sort of thing, or I'm investing to get this money. Just wanted to toss that in as a correction to what I said in my last video. So let's go ahead and back to the article.
Play Warhammer, that gets expensive. No, that's exactly what they're going to do. There's a reason they brought video game people into WotC. They're going to gamify it, and if it's not printing the money they think it should print, it's going to be damn attractive to a company like Tencent or some other big mobile company or something, and they'll just sell the whole damn thing off or something. That's what I think the long-term plan is. There have been rumors that they were going to sell Wizards of the Coast, and people have been arguing with me on this, but multiple outlets confirmed right before the pandemic they were actually getting ready to sell WotC, and they were very successful then. They said, they would never sell it because it prints them money. It's like, no, they look at the future. When you sell a company, you look at the future of the company. Are the sales going to continue to go up and up and up, or have we plateaued? And I think D&D, honestly, unless they start bleeding individual players with microtransactions, I think they plateaued. I think a lot of people are going to stick with the books they have, go with another system, go with OSR. And, I think they're looking at this like, yeah, the pandemic pretty much was it for us. Like, we had the perfect storm of Stranger Things, which showcases a version of D&D that no longer exists. We had Stranger Things paired up with everybody being stuck in their house and playing more games, more board games, more card games. And now we see that Hasbro stock is cratering. So as we can see, Hasbro stock continues to fall. It fell again today. Hasbro stock falls Wednesday, underperforms the market. Shares of Hasbro slipped 1.17% to 59.96. They've really been dropping off a cliff, and a lot of it has to do, again, with that perception that WotC is weighing them down. So they're going to do what they have to do to try to get as much money out of individual players. And the question for you is, are you going to go along for the ride, or is it time to get off of this train? I mean, I'm just saying. I don't know, guys. I'm going to wrap it up.
Yeah, like I said, screw D&D. It's not a good game. You should play Talaslanta here. This is they do have the 5e version, so if you're familiar with D&D rules, you can play this, which I don't know why you would, but whatever. Just go to the Talaslanta for free. You can download 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition for free. There's a novel, apparently. I've never seen the novel because it's not available, but you can read through this stuff here. Here's the books right here. You can buy books if you want to, get them on eBay or Amazon. There's lots of books for this game. There are 58 different races in it and like 30 different cultures amongst the humans. Lots of room for imagination. If you just want to use the rules in the game and play your own thing, fine. Use the rules in the game and play your own thing. Set up your own world. That's fine. Or, hey, download the Dice 6 PDF for free. 75 pages of book, and you can play anything you want to. Anything you want to. Personified bugs in a space adventure. Knock yourself out. Go ahead. I'm going to release my own game probably this year. I am going to release my novel later on this year. I'm finding out a lot about releasing a book, and it's been just an insane process that I am kind of really worried about. But look for my own tabletop role-playing game later this year. It will be one book, and you can do anything you want to. I might release a supplemental book later on sometime just to be like, hey, look, if you want to play with this setting or with these types of creatures, then hey, here you go. Knock yourselves out. I got a supplemental book for it. But the book is going to be, I don't know, I'm looking at, if I pad it out 300 pages, the basic Dungeons & Dragons book is 250 pages. Right now, the rules of my book, and I'm going to add in supplemental stuff so you understand, you have examples of what you can do in the game. It's going to be 120 pages. So it's not, you don't need 250 pages in the base rule book in D&D. Hundreds of rules, especially when you include the magic system. And D&D's always had that problem. They've always had too many spells. 455 spells is the average number of spells in D&D books starting from 1st edition. I don't know about 4th edition. Like I've said, I've never played it, but ridiculous. You don't need, how many different ways are there to attack something with magic? According to D&D, a lot. Anyway, that's all I got for this time. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.